The smoke billowed so thick that Caspian Volk couldn't see his own gloved hands in front of his face. The Haraway Ranch was a blazing cathedral of destruction, orange flames licking hungrily at the August sky while timber beams groaned like dying giants. He'd been fighting fires for 12 years, but this wildfire had moved faster than anything he'd ever seen. 60-mile-per-hour winds pushing it across the drought-stricken Montana countryside like a living thing with malicious intent. "Folk, get out of there!" Captain Durgan's voice crackled through his radio. "The whole structure's compromised!" But Caspian had heard it, a sound that cut through the roar of flames like a knife through silk. The desperate whinnying of a horse, trapped somewhere in the maze of burning stalls. His thermal imaging camera had died 20 minutes ago, leaving him to navigate by instinct and the faint glow of emergency lighting that somehow still functioned. The heat was overwhelming, even through his protective gear. Sweat poured down his face, mixing with soot as he pushed deeper into the stable. The air was poison, thick with burning hay and melting plastic, but his breathing apparatus was holding steady. Each step forward felt like walking into the mouth of hell itself. There, in the far corner stall, pressed against the back wall, stood a magnificent chestnut mare. Her coat was singed, her eyes white with terror, but she was alive. The gate was jammed, warped by the extreme heat, and flames were already starting to eat away at the wooden framework above her. "Easy, girl," Caspian whispered, though his voice was lost in the chaos. He grabbed his Halligan bar and went to work on the twisted metal latch. The mare reared and struck at the air, panic making her dangerous, but Caspian had grown up around horses on his grandfather's farm in Wyoming. He recognized the look in her eyes, not just fear, but intelligence. The latch gave way with a screech of protesting metal. The mare bolted past him so fast she nearly knocked him down, heading straight for what she somehow knew was the exit. Caspian followed, his legs burning with exhaustion, his air supply running dangerously low. They burst out of the stable together into the comparatively cool night air. The mare galloped 20 yards before stopping, turning back to look at him with those same intelligent dark eyes. For a moment, human and horse regarded each other across the smoke-filled distance, two survivors sharing a moment of mutual recognition. "That was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever seen you do," Captain Durgan said, appearing at Caspian's side with a medical kit. "Your air gauge shows you had maybe 2 minutes left." Caspian pulled off his helmet, running a hand through his sweat-soaked hair. "Couldn't leave her." The mare stood silhouetted against the orange glow of the burning ranch, her head held high despite her ordeal. Ranch owner Bronson Haraway appeared, his face streaked with tears and soot. "That's Tempest," he said, his voice breaking. "She's been with us 8 years, finest cutting horse in 3 counties. I thought we'd lost her for sure." As the firefighting crews worked through the night to contain the blaze, Caspian found himself glancing repeatedly toward the horse trailer where Tempest waited, calm now, but still watchful. Something had passed between them in that burning stable, a connection forged in fire and fear that neither of them would soon forget. 3 weeks later, Caspian found himself standing at the entrance to the rebuilt Haraway Ranch, a bouquet of apples and carrots in his hand like some kind of peace offering. The insurance money had come through quickly, and Bronson had wasted no time in reconstruction. The new stable gleamed with fresh timber and modern safety systems, but Caspian could still smell the ghost of smoke in the air. "She remembers you," Bronson said, emerging from the barn office with a cup of coffee steaming in the crisp morning air. "Been restless ever since I mentioned you were coming by." Caspian felt foolish holding the treats, but something had been nagging at him since that night. Maybe it was the way Tempest had looked back at him, or the dreams he'd been having about those intelligent dark eyes. His therapist would probably call it survivor's guilt or displaced trauma response, but Caspian knew better. Sometimes connections transcended explanation. Tempest emerged from her new stall with a confident stride, her chestnut coat gleaming in the autumn sunlight. The singed patches had grown out, replaced by healthy hair, but Caspian could see faint scars along her right flank, permanent reminders of their shared ordeal. "Hello, beautiful," he murmured, extending his hand palm up. The mare approached cautiously, nostrils flaring as she caught his scent. Recognition flickered in her eyes, and she gently took an apple from his palm, her whiskers tickling his skin. "I've been thinking," Bronson said, watching the interaction with obvious pleasure. "Tempest isn't the same horse she was before the fire. Oh, she's healthy enough, but she's different. More aware somehow. Like she's waiting for something." Caspian stroked the mare's neck, feeling the powerful muscles beneath her coat. "Waiting for what?" "Maybe for you to come back." Bronson took a long sip of his coffee. "Look, I know this might sound crazy, but I've been ranching for 37 years. Horses are like people. Sometimes they form attachments that defy logic. You saved her life, Folk. In her mind, that creates a bond." Over the following months, Caspian found himself making regular trips to the ranch. At first, it was just weekend visits, bringing treats and spending an hour or two with Tempest. But gradually, those visits became longer. Bronson taught him to saddle her properly, to read her moods and signals. Caspian discovered that riding was like meditation. The rhythm of Tempest's gait, the connection between rider and horse, the vast Montana landscape stretching endlessly in all directions. "You're a natural," Bronson observed one Saturday afternoon, as Caspian and Tempest returned from a trail ride. "She trusts you completely. That's rare for a horse that's been through trauma." Caspian dismounted, running his hand along Tempest's shoulder. "Maybe we understand each other. We've both seen things burn." The firefighting season had been brutal that year. 3 major wildfires, countless structure fires, and 2 close calls that had left Caspian questioning his career choice. But somehow, spending time with Tempest had become his anchor, a reminder that sometimes you could save something beautiful from the flames. "I've got a proposition for you," Bronson said one evening as they watched Tempest graze in the pasture. "My arthritis is getting worse and I'm thinking about selling the ranch, but I can't stand the thought of Tempest going to strangers. She belongs with someone who understands her." Caspian's heart clenched. "Bronson, I can't afford—" "Not talking about money, son. I'm talking about partnership. You help me run this place on weekends and evenings, learn the business, and when I'm ready to retire, you take over. Tempest comes with the deal." The offer hung in the air between them like a bridge spanning 2 different futures. Caspian looked at Tempest, her coat burnished gold in the setting sun, and felt something shift inside his chest, a recognition that some paths were meant to be walked together. The call came at 3:17 a.m. on a Thursday in September, dragging Caspian from deep sleep into the harsh fluorescent reality of the fire station. Dispatch's voice was tight with urgency. "Multiple structure fire, 2847 Meadowbrook Lane, possible entrapment." Caspian was suited up and in engine 19 within 4 minutes, his mind already shifting into the focused calm that came with years of emergency response. But as they screamed through the pre-dawn darkness, sirens wailing, something cold settled in his stomach when he recognized the address. Meadowbrook Lane was where Tempest and Bronson lived now. They'd moved to a smaller property after selling, the main ranch to a development company. The new place was more manageable for Bronson's arthritis, with a modest house and a 4-stall barn where Tempest and 3 other horses lived in comfortable retirement. "Jesus," muttered Joaquin Reeves, the company's newest recruit, as they rounded the final curve. The house was fully engulfed, flames shooting 40 feet into the night sky. But it was the barn that made Caspian's blood freeze. Orange fingers of fire were just beginning to lick at the roof, and he could hear the terrified screaming of horses trapped inside. Captain Durgan was already coordinating the attack as they deployed. "Reeves, Martinez, hit the house with the deck gun. Volk, Chen, that barn is going to go up fast. Get those animals out now." Caspian grabbed his gear and ran toward the barn, his mind cataloging details with professional efficiency, even as his heart hammered against his ribs. The fire had started in the house and was spreading through dry grass toward the outbuildings. They had maybe 10 minutes before the barn became a death trap. The heavy sliding door was stuck, warped by heat and smoke. Lieutenant Chen attacked, it with his Halligan while Caspian peered through the growing haze. 4 stalls, 4 horses, and in the far corner, Tempest. Her head was high, ears pricked forward, but she wasn't panicking like the others. She was waiting. "Doors free." Chen shouted, and they plunged into the smoke-filled interior. The first 3 horses were relatively easy. Spooked, but cooperative, they allowed themselves to be led out into the night. But as Caspian approached Tempest's stall, he could see the intelligence in her eyes, the recognition that cut through smoke and chaos like a blade. "Hey, girl," he said softly, his voice muffled by his breathing apparatus. "Remember me?" She stepped forward calmly, pressing her nose against his gloved hand. No fear, no panic, just trust. He clipped a lead rope to her halter, and she followed. Him toward the exit without hesitation, even as burning debris began to rain down from the rafters above. They emerged into the relative safety of the yard just as the barn roof collapsed in a shower of sparks and flame. Tempest stood quietly beside him, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight, while the other horses milled about in confusion. "Bronson!" Caspian called out, suddenly realizing he hadn't seen the old rancher. "Where's Bronson?" "Here!" The voice came from behind the fire trucks, and Caspian felt relief flood through him as Bronson appeared, supported by 2 paramedics. His face was streaked with soot and his left arm hung at an odd angle, but he was alive. "Tempest?" Bronson's voice was hoarse with smoke inhalation. "She's safe," Caspian assured him, leading the mare closer. "They're all safe." Bronson reached out with his good hand to touch Tempest's neck, and tears carved clean tracks through the soot on his weathered face. "Lost everything else," he whispered. "But not her. Not her." As dawn broke over the smoldering ruins of what had been Bronson's home, Caspian found himself making another promise, one that would bind his future to the intelligent mare who had somehow become the center of his world. 6 months after the fire, Caspian stood in the doorway of his newly constructed barn, watching Tempest explore her spacious stall with obvious approval. The insurance settlement had been fair, and combined with his savings and a loan, he'd been able to purchase 40 acres on the outskirts of Millerville. It wasn't much, a modest ranch house, a 4-stall barn, and rolling pasture land, but it was theirs. Bronson had moved to assisted living in town after his injuries proved more serious than initially thought. A shattered collarbone had healed poorly, and the smoke inhalation had aggravated his chronic bronchitis. But he visited twice a week, arriving in his ancient Ford pickup with stories and advice that Caspian absorbed like a student. "She's putting on weight," Bronson observed, running an experienced eye over Tempest's form. "Good muscle tone, bright eyes. You're taking care of her." Caspian nodded, though he sometimes wondered who was taking care of whom. Tempest had become his anchor, the steady presence that centered him after difficult shifts at the fire station. When he'd seen a child's burned teddy bear in the ashes of a house fire or watched a family lose everything they'd worked for, he would come home to find Tempest waiting by the fence, her intelligent gaze somehow understanding his need for silent companionship. "I've been thinking about getting her a companion," Caspian said, scratching behind Tempest's ears. "Maybe an older gelding. She seems restless sometimes." "Horses are herd animals," Bronson agreed. "But she's bonded to you now. That's her herd." He paused, studying Caspian's face. You ever think about what happens if something happens to you? Firefighting's dangerous work. It was a conversation they'd been dancing around for months. Caspian was 34, unmarried, with no family, nearby. His parents had retired to Florida, and his sister lived in Seattle with her own family. If something happened to him during a call, Tempest would be alone again. "I've got a will," Caspian said finally. "She'd go to you." "I'm 73 years old, son. My riding days are behind me." Bronson's voice was gentle but firm. "Have you thought about training her? Not just basic riding, but specialized work. She's got the intelligence and the temperament for it." The idea intrigued Caspian. He'd read about therapy horses, search and rescue animals, even horses trained to work with firefighters and emergency responders. Tempest had already proven her courage under fire, literally. Maybe there was a way to formalize that partnership. That weekend, Caspian contacted Meridian Wynn, a trainer in Bozeman who specialized in equine emergency response. Meridian arrived the following Tuesday in a horse trailer that looked more like a mobile classroom, complete with portable obstacles and training equipment. "She's beautiful," Meridian said, watching Tempest move around the paddock. "Good conformation, intelligent eyes. Tell me about her temperament." Caspian found himself describing the night of the first fire, the way Tempest had remained calm while other horses panicked, her apparent ability to read situations and respond appropriately. Meridian listened with growing interest. "Some horses have an instinct for emergency work," she explained. "They're naturally calm under pressure, responsive to human cues and protective of their handlers. From what you're describing, Tempest might be one of them." The evaluation took 3 hours. Meridian put Tempest through a series of tests designed to assess her reaction to loud noises, sudden movements, smoke machines, and even recordings of sirens and emergency radio chatter. Through it all, Tempest remained focused and calm, her attention fixed on Caspian as if awaiting instructions. "I'll work with you both," Meridian said finally. 3 days a week for 6 months. By the end of that time, she'll be certified for basic emergency response, crowd control, evacuation assistance, even basic search patterns. But Caspian..." She paused, her expression serious. "This kind of training creates an even deeper bond between horse and handler. You're not just partners anymore. You become a team. That's a responsibility that goes both ways." As they shook hands on the agreement, Caspian felt the familiar sensation of his life shifting course. But this time, instead of running toward danger alone, he would have Tempest beside him, a partnership forged in fire and strengthened by trust. The emergency call came on a sweltering July afternoon when the temperature gauge on engine 19 read 104 degrees. Caspian was finishing his shift, looking forward to an evening ride with Tempest, when the tones dropped and dispatch's urgent voice filled the station. "Structure fire with entrapment, 1247 Old Mill Road. Multiple victims reported trapped on second floor." But this call was different. As they rolled up to the scene, Caspian could see this wasn't just any structure fire. It was the old Kemper farmhouse, a century-old building that had been converted into apartments for migrant workers. Families with children lived here, and the wooden structure was going up like kindling. Captain Durgan coordinated the initial attack while Caspian and Lieutenant Chen prepared for search and rescue. But as they approached the building, Caspian's trained eye caught something that made his blood run cold. The fire had started in the basement and was moving up through the walls. The old balloon frame construction was acting like a chimney, creating a flashover situation that could happen without warning. "We've got maybe 5 minutes before this." "Whole place lights up!" Chen shouted over the roar of flames and diesel engines. They found the first 2 victims quickly, an elderly man and woman who had been overcome by smoke but were still breathing. As they carried them to safety, Caspian heard it, a child's cry coming from somewhere deeper in the building. "There's still someone inside," he told Captain Durgan. "Sounds like a kid." "Negative. Durgan replied, checking his watch. Buildings. Too unstable. We're moving to exterior attack. But even as they began the retreat, Caspian could hear the crying growing weaker. A child was dying in there, and they were walking away. He thought of Tempest, the trust in her dark eyes, the way she had followed him out of that burning barn without hesitation. Sometimes you didn't get to choose your moments of truth. They chose you. Without a word, Caspian broke from the team and headed back into the building. The smoke was so thick he couldn't see his hand in front of his face. His thermal camera was useless in the superheated environment, and the floor beneath his feet was becoming dangerously unstable. But he followed the sound of crying through the maze of rooms, his air supply dwindling with each passing second. He found her in a back bedroom, a little girl, maybe 5 years old, huddled under a bed with her arms wrapped around a small dog. The ceiling above them was beginning to sag, and Caspian could hear the ominous groaning of structural supports pushed beyond their limits. "Hey, sweetheart," he said gently, pulling off his helmet so she could see his face through the smoke. "I'm here to help you." The child looked up at him with eyes wide with terror, clutching the dog tighter. She spoke in rapid Spanish, words he couldn't understand but didn't need to. Her fear was universal. "It's okay," he said, reaching for her. "We're going home." But as he lifted the child and her dog, a deep rumbling filled the air. The floor beneath them began to buckle, and Caspian realized with crystal clarity that they weren't going to make it out. The building was coming down, and he had maybe 30 seconds to find another exit, or they would all die together in this smoke-filled tomb. That's when he heard it, a sound that seemed impossible over the roar of the fire. Horses' hooves on pavement getting closer, and then, impossibly, Tempest's voice, a clear, trumpeting whinny that seemed to cut through the chaos like a beacon. Through the smoke-obscured window, Caspian could see her. Tempest, somehow free. From her pasture, somehow here, pacing back and forth beneath the second-story window with an urgency that transcended understanding. Behind her, he could see other figures, paramedics, firefighters, even what looked like a news van. The window was his only chance. Caspian kicked out the glass and looked down. It was a 15-foot drop onto concrete, survivable for him maybe, but potentially fatal for a 5-year-old child. Unless Tempest positioned herself directly beneath the window, her body tense, with purpose. She looked up at Caspian, and in her intelligent dark eyes he saw not just recognition, but determination. She was going to catch them. The drop lasted forever and no time at all. Caspian clutched the child and her dog against his chest, feeling the building shudder behind them as structural supports finally gave way. For a moment they were suspended in space, falling through smoke and sparks toward the concrete below and toward Tempest, who stood perfectly positioned with the steady calm of a trained emergency responder. They hit together, Caspian absorbing most of the impact as Tempest's powerful body cushioned their fall. The mare staggered but held firm, her legs braced against the shock. For a moment, the three of them, man, child, and horse, formed a tangle of arms and legs and fur, but they were alive and they were breathing, and that was miracle enough. "Get them back!" Captain Durgan's voice cut through the chaos as the building's second floor collapsed in a shower of sparks and burning timber. Paramedics rushed forward, taking the child from Caspian's arms as he rolled off Tempest's back onto the blessed coolness of grass. The little girl, her name was Sophia, they learned later, had minor smoke inhalation and a few scratches from broken glass. Her dog, a scrappy terrier mix named Cisco, was unharmed but thoroughly traumatized. As paramedics loaded them into an ambulance, Sophia reached out one small hand toward Tempest, speaking softly in Spanish. She says, "Thank you, beautiful horse," translated Maria Santos, one of the EMTs. "She says the horse is an angel." Caspian sat on the ground beside Tempest, his helmet discarded, his face streaked with soot, and tears he didn't remember shedding. His hands shook as he ran them over Tempest's legs and body, checking for injuries, but she seemed remarkably unharmed despite their dramatic landing. "How?" he asked Bronson, who had somehow appeared at the scene along with what looked like half the town. "How did she get here?" "Darndest thing," Bronson said, his weathered face creased with wonder. "I was visiting Meridian when the call came over the scanner. We were watching the news coverage when Tempest started acting strange, pacing, whinnying, trying to jump the fence. Meridian said she'd never seen anything like it." Meridian Wynn stepped forward, her trainer's eye still assessing Tempest's condition. "Horses have senses we don't fully understand. Some can detect earthquakes hours before they hit. Others sense storms coming from miles away. But this..." She shook her head. "This was something else. She knew you were in danger." The story made national news within hours. "Miracle Horse Saves Firefighter and Child" ran on CNN. "Real-life Flicka to the rescue," proclaimed the New York Post. But for Caspian, sitting in his own pasture 3 days later with Tempest grazing peacefully beside him, the media attention felt irrelevant compared to the quiet miracle of their partnership. Sophia's family had visited the day before, bringing flowers and homemade tamales and a hand-drawn picture of a horse with wings. The little girl had wrapped her arms around Tempest's neck and whispered something in Spanish that needed no translation. Pure gratitude, expressed in the universal language of trust. "You know what this means, don't you?" Meridian had said, as they watched Sophia feed Tempest carrots with the fearless generosity of childhood. "You two aren't just partners anymore. You're legendary." But Caspian knew better. They weren't legendary. They were simply what happened when two souls found each other across the impossible divide between human and animal, when trust and courage created something greater than the sum of its parts. 6 months later, Caspian and Tempest were officially certified as Montana's first equine-assisted emergency response team. They worked search and rescue in wilderness areas, provided therapy, visits to hospitals and nursing homes, and appeared at fire safety demonstrations across the state. But their real work happened in quiet moments, the trust built between species, the reminder that courage could come on 4 legs as well as 2. On their first anniversary as partners, Caspian sat on his porch watching Tempest graze in the golden light of sunset. The mare looked up at him occasionally, those intelligent dark eyes still holding the same recognition they had shared in that burning stable so long ago. She had saved him as surely as he had saved her, and in doing so, they had discovered that some partnerships were written in fire and sealed with something deeper than words. Tomorrow there would be another call, another emergency, another chance, to prove that heroes came in all forms. But tonight there was just peace and grass, and the quiet companionship of 2 survivors who had found their way home.